Hi, today we're going to talk about the new digital adaptive SAT, which is rolling out very, very soon. I'm Anna Moss, the founder of Mind the Test Tutoring, Brain-Based Education, and let's get started. So the biggest question that most people have is what is going to change? We know that there's some new revamp of the SAT coming in 2023, but we don't know what that actually means. So, in fact, the College Board has released some information about this. No. Okay, scrap that, scrap all of that. Restarting. Sorry, it's like 5:30 a.m. here. Okay. So one question that many people have is, when is this change going to take place? And it actually matters where you are. If you're taking the SAT within the US, it's different from if you're taking the SAT outside the country, if you're an international student, for example. Now, it's not about whether you're a citizen or not. It's just literally what country are you in when you're taking the SAT. So if you're taking the SAT within the US, then the first rollout of the new digital adaptive test will actually be for the fall 2023 PSAT, not the SAT. So that is anyone who is going to be taking the SAT, the actual SAT, in the fall. This does not apply to them. So like seniors as of January 2023, they will not take the new test. But if somebody's going to be in 10th or 11th grade in fall 2023 doing the PSAT, then they will take the new digital adaptive version. The actual SAT doesn't roll out until a few months after that for the spring 2024 PSAT and SAT, most likely in the March. So it's kind of nice that the PSAT comes out first with the new edition, so you do get to practice on it before you then take the real SAT in the new digital adaptive version in the spring, just a few months after. So again, anyone who's a senior as of fall 2023, they will not take the new version, but everybody else will. Now, international students actually get it earlier. International students are going to be starting with the new digital adaptive SAT in March 2023. So if you're watching this in January when I made it, that's just a few months away. So good luck. Now, one big difference with the new SAT is that it is bring your own device. Now, what they say on the website, on the official College Board website, is students can take the digital SAT with any Windows laptop or tablet, Mac laptop or iPad, or school-managed Chromebook. So you can bring any of these, you can practice on these at home, and these should all work. They recommend that if you don't have one, you can borrow one from your school, a family member, or a friend. But you can also sign up to borrow from College Board at least 30 days in advance. So that's nice. They will lend you one, but you really need to be on top of things. You can't just show up on test day and assume that there will be a device for you. There might not. So if you don't have one, try to borrow one. If you can't borrow one, at least a month in advance, contact College Board. Now, what's really nice, really nice, is that you don't just have to wonder, oh, will my device work? Like, oh, my Chromebook is school managed, or oh, it's mine, I don't know if it'll work. You can test it out. Download the free Blue Book app. I'll give you information on this later, but basically the app that you'll be taking the real test on, you can actually download that in advance and do practice tests right there. So you can get the exact same testing experience that you'll get, which is really nice. You're not going to be using some weird computer. You'll be using your computer, your iPad, your Chromebook, and you can practice and make sure it all works in advance. Now, other than when the test is rolling out, the other biggest question that people always have is what's actually changing? Is this really a big deal? And the answer is, I think it is a fairly big deal. There is quite a lot that's changing. So let's go through it. On the old traditional paper and pencil SAT, everyone had all the same questions, and all the questions were worth the same. If you've done a reasonable amount of test prep before, you probably heard this, because we teachers would always say, oh, everything's worth the same, so do the easy questions, don't waste your time with the hard ones if you're going to get them wrong. That is not true anymore. That is not true anymore, because all the questions are not worth the same anymore. So the adaptive test is a lot more complex. Let's go through it. It has 2 modules for each section. So for English and for math. Module 1 has easy, medium, and hard questions weighted, mixed together. This assesses your level. So basically, if you get everything right in module 1, or if you get almost everything right in module 1, then the computer will chomp up that information and say, oh, you did pretty well. Then I'll give you the harder module 2. If you don't do so well in module 1, the computer will chomp that up and say, oh, I'll give you the easier part of level 2, because you probably will not be able to do the hardest questions. So it's able to kind of assess you in a very granular way without throwing a million questions at you. So it is shorter, which I think is nice. But yeah, so module 1, everybody gets the same module 1 with the easy, medium, and hard questions mixed together. Then it assesses your level. If you do well, it will give you the medium hard version of module 2. If you don't do so well, it will give you the easy medium version of module 2. And that's it. So some people also wonder, well, wait a minute. If I do well on module 1, and then it gives me all the hard questions in module 2, isn't that going to hurt my score, right? Because the way it used to be is that all the questions used to be worth the same. So if you got all hard questions, it would just hurt your score. Thankfully, that's not how it is anymore. Now, I haven't been able to find information about the literal rules for grading, but I've taken the practice tests on the app. I've looked at the scoring. I've looked at the scoring my students have gotten on their practice tests from the app. And it's basically weighted. So that is, if you get hard questions right, you get more points. If you get easy questions right, you get fewer points. So don't worry about, if I get all the hard questions, that'll hurt my score. That's not correct. It will account for it, as far as I know. I don't work for the College Board, so I don't know any secret information, but everything they've released in any way to the public, that's what I'm going off of. Yeah, so this is really different, right? Everybody gets the first module, but then the second module is different. Another question that people often ask is this at the question level? Like, for example, if I get question 1 right, do I get a harder question 2? If I get that right, do I get a harder question 3? The answer is no. It is not at the question level. It is at the section module level. So that is, if you get the first, let's say 30 questions right in the section, or 20 questions, then you get a batch of harder questions, or you get a batch of easier questions if you don't do well. But it's not like every single question is getting harder or easier based on how you score. It's just by chunk. There's one mixed chunk, and then there's one easier hard chunk. Okay, some other changes. So this is more in terms of the actual structure of the test. And this is really relevant to if you're a tutor watching this, if you're a teacher, or maybe you're someone who's done some test prep before and you want to see which parts of my test prep are still relevant. So the old SAT was about 3 hours long, and it was very fast-paced. The new SAT is a little bit shorter. It's 2.25 hours long, and it is a bit slower. Now, I mean, it's not slow. You still have to be very, very fast, but the College Board did announce their intent to make it a bit slower paced. So they're hoping that people will not have to think quite as quickly. Nonetheless, timing is very important. And it's not a slow test. So you definitely do want to practice under timed conditions. Another pretty different thing is that the old test had separate reading and writing sections. If you've done any test prep or if you've done a PSAT, you know this. There was a reading section at the beginning and then a writing section following it. The new test actually combines them. It has a combined reading writing section. So you don't have just a reading test and just a writing test. They just mush them all together in the reading writing test. Now, the reading test has undergone very significant changes. The writing test has too, but I think it matters less. You may remember if you've done any PSATs or test prep before that the reading test used to have long articles about a few topics and then 10 to 11 questions about one article, right? The writing and reading test both did this. They would have long articles. You had to read them pretty carefully and then answer a lot of questions about this one article. The new test has completely changed that. So any kind of speed reading techniques or getting the main idea quickly of like an article, that's not relevant anymore. Because they basically, the College Board doesn't want people to just skim read. They want people to be able to sit down and focus on a short passage. So what they're doing now is both reading and writing questions just have short 2 to 4 sentence excerpts about many different topics. So you'll just read a couple of sentences, pretty short, and then one blurb, one question. So basically they'll give you like 3 sentences, you'll read them, and then you'll answer a question about it. Done. Next question, they'll give you 3 new sentences about a totally different topic. You answer a question about it. Done. New blurb, new question. And they're all about different topics. So this is pretty different, right? You don't have to read a long article anymore. You just have to read a few sentences very, very carefully and answer one question about it. And the other big change is the math section. So the old SAT had the math no calc section, where you could not use a calculator for part of it. It had to be all by hand. And it also had quite complicated math word problems. The SAT was known for this, that a lot of students would do the SAT math or the PSAT math, and they'd say, you know, I'm pretty good at math, but I have no idea what they're asking because it's so wordy and confusing. So the new test has completely changed this. The biggest change, I think, is this guy right here. The Desmos calculator is allowed on the entire math test. This is huge. So there are so many questions that you can solve. It used to take a couple of minutes and a lot of brain power, and now you can solve it in like 10 seconds using the calculator. You can graph everything. It's a completely different thing now. So I would, if you're not familiar with Desmos, I would get familiar with it. But what's nice is that the app that you can download that I'll tell you more about later, the Blue Book official SAT app, is free, and the practice tests have the Desmos calculator that you'll use in them. So when you're practicing, you can actually practice with the calculator that you'll have. It's a really useful calculator. You can really just type in equations and it'll solve them for you. It'll graph them for you. It's just really nice. You can also bring your calculator. Personally, I would use Desmos. I find it much easier to use than any graphing calculator I've ever used. But if you love your calculator, you can bring it. Now, there are limits on the types of calculators you're allowed to bring, just like the old SAT. So if you're not sure, you can just Google it, like what calculators can I bring to the SAT. But again, personally, I would just use the Desmos calculator because I think it's just amazing. I think it's so great. So, you know, you don't need to worry about doing things out by hand that you'd never have to do in the real world. You could just worry about actually understanding how to use the tools in front of you to solve math problems. So it's great. The other difference is that allegedly they're trying to make the math problems less wordy. Basically, the College Board has decided that, you know, they don't want to be trying to trick you quite as much as they have been in the past. They don't want to be putting people at a disadvantage if maybe English isn't their first language, right? There are a lot of people who take the SAT who speak other languages. And I think the College Board said, well, you know, it's not really fair then that the math test penalizes that. So they're trying to make the math word problems less wordy. That said, you're still going to have to do word problems. They'll just be slightly less painful. So yeah, big changes to the math test. I think the calculator being allowed is going to be huge. It's going to completely change a lot of test taking strategy. So, I mean, if you're doing things like the quadratic formula by hand, I'd say probably don't. You can save a lot of time. Now, what's going to be the same? Well, there's a lot of stuff that is going to be the same. The scoring is the same. So the SAT will still be scored from 400 to 1600, 1600 being the perfect score. It still tests similar skills. So a lot of the test taking strategy is going to change a lot because the timing is different. The difficulty of the questions is different. The reading section is different. The math section is different, right? They're all different, but the skills are the same. So if you have done some test prep in the past and you've worked on your grammar, you've worked on your algebra, you've worked on your geometry, your reading skills, all of those things are the same. It's really just like how the questions are and how the timing is. So what that means, I think, is I wouldn't necessarily use old test prep materials. Like for me, for my students, I have given them some specific things that are the same as what I would use, or what I used to use rather. So like my writing and language book, I would have students do that because my writing and language book is not focused on test taking strategy and timing as much as it's focused on learning the underlying grammar, learning the underlying rhetorical skills, and the right thought processes. So I think my writing and language book is still relevant. I also still give the College Panda math book that I like a lot because, again, they're not focused on like test tricks and timing and things like that. They're really focused on learning the skills. That said, I would focus a lot more heavily on calculators than any previous SAT book has, right? Because no SAT book in the past would have said, oh, just put everything into your calculator, it's fine. Because, you know, half the math test you couldn't. But now it's going to be very different. So I would say, well, I'd say really, if you have a question about what prep materials to use, ask me. But yeah, I would say definitely some materials are not going to be relevant, especially for reading. That said, it is basically the same skills. So any skills you build will help. And you get the same math formula sheet. So as you may or may not know, at the beginning of the math test, you get a list of certain formulas like area of a circle, the 30, 60, 90 triangles, that kind of thing. You still get that. I wouldn't rely on it personally, because you need to know how to use the formulas. You need to be able to notice them pretty quickly. So I wouldn't just rely on like, oh, it's written down, I don't need to know it. No, I mean, if you don't know the area of a circle, if you don't know how to find the volume of a cube, you're going to struggle. But you do get it, so you can double check. Just like the old SAT, the new SAT is accepted by colleges for admission and scholarships. So colleges like it, they don't view it any differently from the old SAT. And just like the old SAT, you get multiple choice questions for reading and writing, and you get a few grid-ins for math. But mostly multiple choice as well. So it's the same in terms of it's just basically multiple choice and then just a few fill in the blanks for math. All right, so what are your next steps? Well, if you're an international student, you should go here to register. Make sure you get registered. The next test is in March and it will be the new digital SAT. Everybody should go download Blue Book. This is the free College Board app that is where all the practice tests are for the new digital adaptive SAT. And it is also where you will take the real test. So you can actually play around with the exact same app that you'll use on test day, which is nice. You can download it on pretty much anything, iPad, tablet, computer, or a school Chromebook, but it will not work on your phone. Even though it's an app, it will not work on a phone. It will not work on a personal Chromebook. I tried this. I tried to download it on my phone, and it just didn't work. So if you're not sure whether your Chromebook is school or personal, just try to download the app and see if it works. If it works and you're able to open it, then I guess it's fine, probably. But yeah, so I would say today, go download that app, play around with it, take a practice test. And once you are registered, once you are downloaded, and you don't need to register to download it, you can just download it. Then it's time to study. So take a practice test or a PSAT and identify what areas you need to work on. For example, if you take a practice test and you really struggle with commas and semicolons, now you know you need to work on that. So really try to be very granular. Try to be very careful to identify what exact things you got wrong, to identify any patterns. A tutor can be very helpful there because they can often notice things that you don't. So take a practice test and just see what are patterns. Do I tend to get a certain type of question wrong? Do I tend to get a certain type of question right? And even if you feel like you're making stupid mistakes, still try to see if there are any patterns. For example, if you find that you make stupid mistakes for 5 questions that are about punctuation, that might mean that you should work on punctuation. In fact, it almost certainly does mean you need to work on it. So if you find that there's any kinds of patterns, even if you feel like it's a stupid mistake, work on that type of question. And how can you do that? Well, let's see, this is in the past now, so that's not relevant, but I actually am running a lot of free SAT prep classes online, not just for math, but for English as well, at mindthetest.com/free classes. So you can go to mindthetest.com/free classes with a hyphen and sign up. Lots of free test prep there, primarily online, but I've also got in-person stuff going on in the Philadelphia area and in Delaware. So if you happen to be in New Jersey, Philly, or Delaware, you can also sign up for my in-person classes there. I also have an SAT, ACT prep link dump on my blog. That's all my favorite resources. They're free. Some of these are going to be more relevant for the old SAT, but it's just all like the best materials. You can check out my self-paced courses here. You can check out my webinars here. And you can buy my ebook and register for summer camp as well. So I've got summer camps for younger kids on getting ready for high school. I've got SAT prep, college application essay, all that good stuff. So yeah, I hope to see you there. Thank you. Let me know if you have any questions. And Favon, maybe you can edit this guy out or like put a box over it so it just says register for free classes rather than next free class. That would be a big help. All right. All right, let me boot back in. All right, thank you so much. Good luck on the test.